Michel Barnier, the 73-year-old, has been appointed as the new Prime Minister of France. This does not bode well for relations between Baku and Paris. For decades, Barnier has shown support for Armenian nationalism, not bothering to hide his disdain for Turkey. Barnier has a long political career going all the way back to the 1990s, where he served as Secretary of State for European Affairs in Alain Juppé's cabinet. During that time, he made an official visit to Armenia to open the French embassy in the former Soviet Republic. Upon returning, Barnier gave a major interview in which he discussed several interesting points. Firstly, Barnier emphasized the uniqueness of Armenia, stating that it was never as Soviet as other republics and always had ties with France. This was never in doubt. France has indeed always supported Armenia, including Armenian terrorists. It's well known that in 1977, Armenian nationalists Stepan Zatikyan, Akop Stepanyan, and Zavan Bagdasaryan have carried out a series of bombings in the Moscow metro. They were in contact with French intelligence. In the 1970s, Armenian terrorist groups, influenced by the radical ideology of Dashnak-Sutian, began to emerge. Dashnaks chose terrorism as one of their methods to achieve their main goal, recognition of the so-called Armenian genocide by the world powers and the restoration of Armenia's mythical past. From sea to sea, a territory that would include eastern Turkey and the Armenian SSR, in France, Dashnak-Sutian radicals established the first official committee on the so-called Armenian issue. They successfully lobbied the French government to recognize the so-called Armenian genocide. Now back to the new French Prime Minister. In a 1995 interview, Barnier mentioned that the largest Armenian diaspora in Europe was located in France, which would explain why Paris's influence in the region is significant. He also noted that today, 20 years later, this is reflected in reality. We clearly see the central and strategic position of this country. So I said, and I really felt that stability in this zone with Armenia and around Armenia is important. That's why dialogue with Armenia is important and why we want to resume it, he stated. In fact, in 1995, Barnier spoke about Armenia's significance to the EU as a country close to Turkey, Iran, and Azerbaijan. But wait, that's not all. 20 years ago, when speaking about the Metsamur nuclear power plant, Barnier reassured journalists that Armenia and France would address the issue of waste processing and storage. How this turned out for the region is well known. Paris invested about 15 million francs into the project, effectively acting as a nuclear power guarantor, giving a new lease of life to the NPP, which now poses an ecological threat to the entire region. As France's foreign minister in 2004, Michel Barnier became the first representative of the French government to publicly link the events of 1915 with Turkey's desire to join the EU. He officially demanded recognition of the so-called genocide if the EU were to begin accession talks with Ankara. I believe that when the time comes, Turkey will have to come to terms with its past, reconcile with its history, and recognize this tragedy, said Barnier. Turkey's response was swift. A foreign ministry spokesperson stated that Turkey has never recognized and will not recognize any so-called genocide. In 2021, Barnier, along with Valérie Pécresse, illegally entered Azerbaijani territory, which at the time was under the control of Russian peacekeeping forces. They met with leaders of the criminal junta. As a result, he was declared a persona non grata in our country. Pécresse visited Armenia as part of her election campaign, bringing Barnier with her. It now becomes clear that this was due to his long-standing involvement with Armenian separatists. During this visit, Barnier and Pécresse also visited the so-called Armenian Genocide Memorial. The Armenian media were ecstatic over this visit. From what we have learned about Prime Minister Michel Barnier, it's evident that France is unlikely to cease its attempts to destabilize the South Caucasus region.